love, he said, his voice a caress that sent shivers down her spine. Love is the ultimate energy source, the flame that fuels us all. He leaned closer, his breath cool against her neck. Good evening, sleep seekers. It is me, Dieter, the energy vampire. Tonight I will guide you to sleep with a romantic story about an energy vampire who lured a young lady into his lair. Shall we read? Good. So tell me, what's your favorite color? He asked, his eyes gleaming with the faintest hint of mischief. Red, she replied, unsure where the conversation was heading, but willing to play along. He nodded thoughtfully. The color of passion, of life's very essence, he said dramatically, gesturing to the beige curtains that adorned his windows. The room was dimly lit with candles flickering across the dinner table, casting a warm glow on the array of food laid out before them. The scent of dust filled the air, and she could almost feel the energy being sapped from her as the seconds ticked by. "And what about you?" she asked, trying to keep the conversation afloat as the silence grew heavier. He leaned back in his chair, a smug smile playing on his lips. "Color, my dear, is but a mere mortal concept," he replied, his voice dropping to a whisper. "In my world we dine on the hues of existential dread and the shadows of forgotten dreams." Her eyes rolled almost imperceptibly. "How fascinating," she said, her tone flatter than the beige tea with cream that had gone untouched next to her plate. She took a deep breath, the candle wax and dust aroma now a cloying mix that clung to the back of her throat. She glanced around the room, her gaze lingering on the faux Gothic artwork adorning the walls. It was all so predictable, so over the top, she couldn't help but suppress a giggle. "You see," he began, his voice a monotone drone that seemed to echo off the beige walls. "Beige is the color of the universe's indifference, the palette of ennui itself." He paused, expecting a reaction, his eyes searching hers for a spark of intrigue. "It's the color of the in-between, the shade that whispers of unrealized potential," he continued, his enthusiasm waxing as he waxed philosophical about the dullness of existence. And then it hit her like a sledgehammer to the forehead. Everything was beige. The candles, the curtains, the very fabric of his being, all beige. The realization struck her like a bolt of lightning. Here she was, stuck in a romantic dinner with a man whose soul was as bland and uninteresting as a bowl of unsalted oatmeal. She looked down at her plate, the once tantalizing meal now a sad representation of the evening's conversation, a mishmash of flavorless, uninspired small talk. He droned on about the existential ennui of being, the way it permeated every corner of their lives, unnoticed and unappreciated. She nodded, her smile forced and her eyes glazed over. "It's the color of the void," he said, his voice growing more and more nasal with each passing moment. "The color of the emptiness that we all carry within." She nodded again, her mind racing as she tried to think of a polite escape, maybe A fake phone call or a sudden dramatic illness? Anything to break the monotony of his monologue. The energy vampire leaned in closer, his breath a sigh of despair that washed over her in a wave of apathy. Beige is the color of stale bread, of the coffee left in the pot for too long, he mused, his eyes never leaving hers. It's the color of the office carpets that suck the life out of every cubicle dweller, the color of the couch that's seen one too many Netflix binges. He paused, waiting for a response, his hand hovering over his heart as if it pained him to speak such truths. But she was trapped, hypnotized by his divine yet utterly bland beauty. His words were a siren song of boredom, and she felt her life was ebbing away with each painfully drawn-out syllable. Her eyelids grew heavy, and she had to fight the urge to yawn. Her mind was a fog of uninterest, and she could feel her thoughts slow to a crawl like molasses on a cold winter's day. She tried to stand, to make her escape, but her legs felt like they were made of lead, weighing her down into the beige abyss of his dining room. "And then there's German soccer," he began, his eyes lighting up with the enthusiasm of a librarian discussing the Dewey Decimal System, also known as DDS. The precision, the discipline, the sheer existential dread of a tie game in the 90th minute. He launched into a recount of every single goal scored by every single player in the last 5 Bundesliga seasons. The numbers swirled around her like a tornado of tedium, each stat more soul-crushing than the last. She nodded along, her brain screaming for mercy. "So," he said, his voice dripping with the suspense of a soggy tea bag, "who do you think will be this year's champion?" He leaned in, his beige-blue eyes boring into hers as if the fate of the universe rested on her answer. Her mind scrambled for anything at all to say that would either satisfy him or, better yet, be exciting enough to release her from his conversational purgatory. "I've always had a soft spot for Schalke 04, she said, naming the first team that popped into her head. "They're so, consistent." The energy vampire's eyes lit up like Christmas trees with an intense blue glow, and she inwardly groaned. "Ah, Schalke, the ever-elusive bridesmaids of the Bundesliga," he began, launching into an analysis so detailed it could double as a PhD thesis. She nodded, her thoughts drifting to the sweet embrace of oblivion, praying for the sweet relief of an off-topic question. But no, his eyes remained glued to hers, his words a never-ending stream of soccer statistics that flowed like a river of molasses. She did not believe in God, but right now she began to pray to any divine entity that might be out there. She prayed he would not explain offsides to her. "The offsides rule," he said, a twinkle of excitement in his beige-blue eyes, "is a dance as old as time itself. A delicate balance between the thrills of the goal and the crushing despair of a disallowed point." He paused for dramatic effect, his hand tracing an invisible arc in the air. "It's the silent guardian, the watchful protector," he continued, his voice a monotone symphony of boredom. "The player who exists on the edge of the field in the shadow of the referee's whistle, poised to strike, yet never truly allowed to engage. Her mind drifted as he dissected the intricacies of the offside trap, his voice a dull thud in her ears. She tried to focus on the candle flame, the way it flickered and danced, a stark contrast to the static beige world around her. Yet his words pulled her back, a siren's call of the mundane. It's like the universe, he mused, always moving the goalposts, keeping us just out of reach. And then it clicked. Soccer referees, the beige-clad arbiters of fate on the pitch, the silent spectres that dictated the flow of the game with their whistles and flags. They were the ultimate energy vampires, feeding on the passion and excitement of the players and fans alike. The more they talked about it, the more she could see it. The way they'd hover, waiting for that perfect moment to pounce and drain the life from a promising play. The way their calls could suck the air out of a stadium with the efficiency of a black hole. It was a revelation that made her grin. A grin that started small and grew into a soft, snort-inducing chuckle. The energy vampire looked at her, his expression one of pure confusion. "What's so funny?" he asked, his voice as beige as ever. "Oh, it's just everything," she managed to say between gasps of air. "You're a very special kind of man, the kind that thinks being mysterious is the same as being interesting, that thinks their mundane existence is somehow profound because they were beige and know a few big words." She wiped a tear from her eye, her smile genuine for the first time that evening. "You're all the same, really," she continued, her voice gaining momentum. "From the politicians who drain the life out of every room they enter, to the office drones who can turn a 5-minute conversation into a 5-hour snooze fest. And don't even get me started on the YouTubers who recount their day in excruciating detail, thinking it's somehow captivating because it's in 4K with a hipster filter." Her words were like a slap in the face to the energy vampire. The glow in his eyes dimmed, and the smugness in his smile wavered. He leaned back, his shoulders slumping slightly. "What do you mean?" he asked, a hint of defensiveness in his tone. "I mean," she said, her voice steady, "that you're not fooling anyone with your beige cloak of ennui. It's all just a sad attempt to seem deep when really you're as shallow as a kiddie pool." The energy vampire's expression grew darker, his beige-blue eyes narrowing into slits. He took a sip of his tea, the liquid a dull, translucent beige that perfectly blended in with his bland demeanor. The room grew colder, the candles flickering with the sudden chill that filled the air. He placed his cup down with a thud, the sound echoing through the silence like a gunshot. "You think you're clever," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Oh no," she replied, her smile unwavering. "I know I am. But I'm also bored to tears, and I think it's high time we changed the subject." The energy vampire's beige-blue eyes narrowed to slits yet again. He leaned forward, placing his elbows on the table. "Very well," he said, his voice a cold whisper that sent shivers down her spine. "Let's talk about something truly fascinating. The art of Thermomix recipes, for example." He paused, watching her reaction. Or perhaps the intricate world of vacuum cleaner repairs? Her eyes widened in horror. "No, please," she said, her hands up in gesture of surrender. "Anything but that." "How about," he said with a smug smile, "we delve into the riveting history of the rubber band?" He watched as the young lady's eyes widened in horror. He knew he had her cornered. The rubber band, an invention as simple as it was versatile, had the power to bore anyone into a coma with its mundane yet fascinating backstory. He took a deep breath, ready to unleash his ultimate conversational weapon. The energy vampire began to recount the tale of the rubber band from its humble origins in the late 19th century to its current state as an office staple. He spoke of its creation, of the ingenious minds that had stumbled upon the concept of stretching and releasing rubber to create a loop that could hold things together yet never truly embrace them. He described the various uses of keeping papers in order to the ever-elaborate slingshot wars waged in the corporate jungles. His voice grew monotonous, the kind that could make even the most thrilling plot line of an action movie sound like a yoga instructional tape. The young lady's smile had long since disappeared, replaced with a look of desperation. She had underestimated the depths of his banality, the sheer breadth of his ability to make the most ordinary of subjects sound like the recitation of a phone book. Yet she couldn't look away, his blue-beige-colored eyes holding her in a vice-like grip. Her mind searched for a way out, a topic so mundane it could rival his, a subject so dull it could bore even an eternal being like him. But she was no match for his encyclopedic knowledge of the trivial. As she delved into the nuances of rubber band manufacturing techniques and the environmental impact of rubber plantations, she felt her eyelids drooping. Her thoughts grew sluggish, each syllable a weight that dragged her closer to the abyss of boredom. She tried to interject, to steer the conversation elsewhere, but his words were a relentless tide that washed over her, eroding her will to resist. He talked of the great rubber band shortage of '08, the rubber band's role in the office paperclip wars, and the secret societies that communicated through intricate patterns of band color and thickness. It was a barrage of trivialities that could make even the most stoic individuals weep for mercy. But she was not one to go down without a fight. Summoning her last reserves of energy, she leaned in, her eyes sharpening with a glint of mischief. "Tell me," she began, her voice a siren's call that cut through the fog of his rubber band soliloquy, "have you ever heard of the great elastic conspiracy of 23? The energy vampire blinked, thrown off by the sudden shift in topic. "The what?" "Ah, you see," she said, her faint smile twitching in visible pain. "That was the year when rubber bands mysteriously started to lose their elasticity. It was a dark time for office supplies everywhere." She watched as his interest grew, his blue-beige eyes lighting up with the faintest hint of curiosity. "They say it was a government plot to keep the public docile, a subtle form of psychological warfare," she continued, weaving her tale of intrigue around the mundane. Each snap of a rubber band was a metaphor for the constraints of society, the slow, inevitable stretch towards conformity. He leaned in, the candlelight flickering across his face, casting shadows that made him seem almost sinister. Ah, the great elastic conspiracy, he murmured, his eyes lighting up with a blue glow that seemed to suck the remaining color from the room. But did you know that the rubber band's elasticity is not just a physical trait, but a metaphor for the human condition? Her heart sank as she realized he had seen through her ploy. This was his element, his playground of painfully dull facts and stretched analogies. She had hoped to find something, anything that would bore him as much as he was boring her, but she had underestimated the depth of his commitment to the art of conversational torture. "The rubber band," he began, his voice a drone that could put a room full of caffeinated college students to sleep, "is a symbol of our boundless potential, stretched to its limits only to snap back and remind us of our insignificance in the grand scheme of things." She stifled a yawn, her eyes drooping with the weight of his words. "But let me tell you the true story behind its creation. A tale of ambition, betrayal, and the relentless pursuit of elasticity." He spoke of Charles Goodyear, the man who had stumbled upon the process of vulcanization, turning rubber from a sticky mess into the versatile material we know today. He recounted the struggles of Thomas Hancock, who had fought tooth and tail for recognition in the face of Goodyear's shadow. The energy vampire painted a picture so vividly tedious it felt like she was there, trapped in a Victorian-era rubber factory, watching the never-ending process of boiling and cooling, stretching and snapping. "And did you know," he went on, his blue-beige eyes gleaming with the excitement of a cat watching grass grow, "that the rubber band was originally intended to hold cigars together?" She nodded, feigning interest as her mind began to drift. "But that was just the beginning. The rubber band has been the unsung hero in so many of life's trivial tasks. It's the glue of the stationary world, the silent guardian of paper clips, the... He trailed off, his expression glowing thoughtful as he searched for the next riveting factoid. She took the opportunity to sneak a peek at her phone, the glow of the screen like a beacon of hope in the sea of beige. But he caught her. "Where are your manners?" he chided, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "We're in the middle of a fascinating conversation about the rubber band." The room spun slightly as she forced herself to look back up at him. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice a mix of sweetness and desperation. "I was just admiring the candles. They're so unique." The energy vampire's eyes narrowed again, his smile fading. "Unique, you say?" He leaned back in his chair, his gaze sweeping over the candles before settling on her again. "Ah, the candles. You see, they too have a rich and fascinating history." He took a deep breath, ready to plunge her deeper into the abyss of boredom. The young lady felt her eyelids growing heavier with every word, but she couldn't help the flicker of interest that sparked within her. The candles did have an odd charm to them, their wax a shade of beige that almost seemed to pulsed with the rhythm of his voice. He leaned closer, his breath a warm whisper that smelled faintly of dust and forgotten dreams. "The candles," he began, "are a metaphor for our existence, flickering in the dark, never truly reaching our full potential." Her heart skipped a beat as she felt his hand brush against hers, his touch cold and clammy. She looked up, meeting his eyes, and for a moment she saw something in their blue-beige depths that was almost seductive. His voice grew softer, the monotone giving way of a gentle, hypnotic rhythm. "We burn brightly," he murmured, "consumed by the very thing that gives us light." Her thoughts swirled like the smoke from the candles, torn between the absurdity of his words and the strange allure that seemed to emanate from him. She knew she should be running for the door, screaming for her life, but she couldn't help but be drawn in by his utter lack of charm. She blinked, her mind reeling. "But what about love?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The energy vampire's smile grew. "Ah, love," he said, his voice a caress that sent shivers down her spine. "Love is the ultimate energy source, the flame that fuels us all." He leaned closer, his breath cool against her neck. "But it is also the most fleeting, the most elusive of all our experiences." Her heart raced as she felt his breath against her neck. His cold, clammy hand now wrapped gently around hers. The room's temperature seemed to drop a few more degrees, the candle's light flickering more erratically, as if in sync with her own racing thoughts. Despite his monotonous drone, the energy vampire had a certain allure that was hard to ignore. Like a terrible car crash on the side of the road. She knew she should look away, but she just couldn't. The energy vampire took his silence as an invitation, leaning in even closer, his nose almost touching hers. "You see," he whispered, "love is like a candle. It burns with a fierce passion, but it also consumes the very wax that gives it life." His eyes searched hers, the blue-beige depth seemingly searching for something she wasn't sure she had. But she was tired, so very tired. The weight of his words and the never-ending stream of soccer stats and rubber band trivia had drained her more than any other monologue had ever managed. She couldn't even muster the energy to roll her eyes at his terrible metaphors. All she wanted was to get out of there, to find a place where the air didn't taste like dust and the conversation didn't feel like a punishment. "I think I need some fresh air," she said, her voice strained. She tried to pull her hand away, but his grip was like a vice. His smile never wavered, his eyes never leaving hers. "The night is young, and there is so much more to explore," he said, his voice a seductive purr that sent a shiver down her spine. The energy vampire stood, pulling her up gently. She stumbled slightly, the weight of his words and the sheer volume of beige in the room taking its toll. He led her to the window, the beige curtains parting with a dramatic flourish to reveal the moon, a beige silver in the night sky. "Look at the beauty before us," he murmured, his breath a chilling reminder of their stark differences. "The moon, a celestial body that waxes and wanes much like the human condition." The young lady nodded, trying to keep the exhaustion from showing on her face. She had to find a way out, a way to escape the clutches of his never-ending banality. "It's beautiful," she lied, her voice strained with the effort of maintaining interest. The moon hung in the sky, a beige silver that mirrored the lifelessness of the room behind them. With a sudden burst of energy, she pulled her hand away from him, the candles flickering wildly in the breeze of the open window. "Thank you for the enlightening evening," she said, her voice thin as the tea he served. She took a step back, feeling the cold night air kiss her skin, rejuvenating her like a slap in the face. The energy vampire watched her, his blue beige eyes unreadable. "You're welcome," he said, his voice as dull as the tea he'd been sipping. "I'll be here when you're ready to embrace the beige." The young lady stepped back, the cool night air filling her lungs like a sweet elixir. She took a deep breath, the smell of the city a stark contrast to the stale air of his lair. With each step she took away from the house, the energy began to seep back into her bones, the weight of his words lifting. Yet, as she reached the safety of her car, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was leaving something behind, something that called to her, whispered her name in a beige, monotonous tone. The energy vampire Dieter watched her retreat, his gaze unwavering, his smile as enigmatic as ever. She felt his eyes on her, the same way one feels the heat of the sun on their skin, even when it's obscured by clouds. It was a sensation that both repulsed and intrigued her. She knew she should be relieved to be free from his soul-sucking grasp, but instead she felt a strange pull, a magnetic force that drew her back towards him. As she drove away, her mind raced with thoughts of his beige-filled world. The candles, the soccer stats, the rubber bands. It was all so absurdly boring, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to it all, something that whispered to her in the quiet moments of the night, something that made her want to drive back into the abyss of his conversation. Was it his dry wit, his ability to find the mundane the most exciting of topics, or was it the challenge of cracking his unyielding facade to find the person beneath the layers of boredom he wrapped himself in? For days she couldn't get him out of her mind. The way his eyes glue when he talked about the rubber band conspiracy, the way his voice grew duller when he spoke of love and candles. It was as if he had a secret garden of emotions hidden behind a beige brick wall, and she was dying to explore it. Her friends rolled their eyes at the mention of his name, telling her she was better off with someone who didn't make her want to fall asleep at dinner. But she knew it wasn't just his words that held her captive. It was the strange allure of his very essence.